If you want to impose war on China, you get war. If you want to destroy China, you get destroyed. If you want to bomb China out with nuclear weapons, you will be wiped out with nuclear weapons. China is not going to be pushed around.
你有病！
你说最近这个美国啊，他是真能折腾啊！这一天到晚的就喜欢盯着咱们的台湾海峡，哎，在那瞎嚷嚷，搞得好像明天就会打起来似的。最近啊，南海那边又开始闹腾了，主要就是美国和这个菲律宾啊，他们搞的什么肩并肩联合军演，哎呦喂，那搞的那个气氛是紧张兮兮的。听说这次的军演是这些年来规模最大的一次呢，哎，你说他们是不是闲得没事干啊？其实啊，这事大家都明白啊，这台湾问题是咱们中国最敏感的一根弦儿，那碰都不能随便碰的。可是美国呢，偏偏就要在背后搞小动作。哎，我这听说啊，他们现在又在用什么引诱的招数了，哎，就想让我们往坑里跳，想逼着咱们呀在台湾问题上动真格的。然后呢，他们就好趁机转移这个国内的注意力啊，把他们那些乱七八糟的破事儿都推到咱们头上。他们想的倒挺美的，难道他们就没听过玩火自焚这句成语吗？最近啊，就有个中国网友问了美国萨克斯教授这个问题，让我们来看看这个教授是咋说的。
If Trump feels that his bluff is being called and his bluster is failing, do you fear, Professor Sachs, that's a question that came from China, that they will intensify the tensions in Taiwan, possibly station missiles there in order to provoke the Chinese government to intervene in order to blow everything up rather than lose the exorbitant privilege of the dollar? That's essentially what our viewer has been asking.
Let me say, whether they do it for that reason or for other geopolitical reasons, everything the United States does with Taiwan is playing with conflagration. It's playing not just with fire, it's playing with disaster. And it's very similar to Ukraine, very similar, because the idea of Ukraine was the United States can do what it wants vis-a-vis Ukraine, because what can Russia do? And this, by the way, going back, we talked about Brzezinski. Brzezinski actually writes in 1997 a long section of his book on the grand chessboard, where he says, he analyzes what can Russia do as NATO enlarges. And he says, in the end, nothing. They're going to have to accept it. Okay, this was yet another blunder of American strategy, and it's very clearly written back in 1997. Now, when it comes to Taiwan, the United States, for many reasons, geostrategic, gamesmanship with China, military considerations in an idea that goes back to John Foster Dulles in 1951, the first island chain. We must prevent China from having a breakout to the Pacific. Mind-boggling stuff. They really think that they're gearing up towards a possible war over Taiwan. And if the Taiwanese act like the Ukrainians, there will be a devastating war. And what I mean by acting like the Ukrainians, if the Taiwanese politicians say, America's got our back, we declare independence, there will be a war, no question. So whether the United States provokes the war directly, which I think is less likely, or the United States acts in a way which could cause Taiwanese politicians to be reckless in their own country's situation, like the Ukrainians were, saying, yeah, we love NATO, we're going to do whatever we want to defeat Russia. If the Taiwanese behave that way, there will be war. What can one say about this? Well, I'll just say two things. I'll say, yeah, two main things. First, every war game that has been played and every bit of common sense is that the United States gets defeated in a conventional war. thousands of miles from the U.S. coast. It's crazy idea of the United States that they're going to fight a war with China in China's waters. Okay, this is the first point. Second point is such a war could lead to global annihilation. And that's not hyperbole. That's just also common sense. This is crazy stuff. So I come back to the point that Americans are pretty crazy. They're capable of doing crazy things. It's a militarized society. Trump, I don't know what he knows or wants, but Washington is filled with people talking about war with China. And anyone that talks that way is out of their minds and is really doing profound harm to let's say, the expected future of our planet. And so I hope we never come to that, because it would be certainly a disaster for the United States and most likely a world disaster.
教授的话真是一针见血啊！希望台湾政府能明智点吧，别再做第二个乌克兰了。要说这事儿啊，其实早就有苗头了。你看啊，其实在去年6月份啊，观察者网就提醒咱们了，要小心美国在台海设下的新陷阱。说白了啊，就是他们一边在那边拼命的炒作台海危机，那搞的是人心惶惶啊，一边呢又不停的给咱们施加压力啊，想让咱们忍不住出手。这更搞笑的是他们还给自己设定了一个时间表。这个好多美国人啊，特别喜欢给这个台海冲突定个虚拟时间表。今天说什么2025，明天又说什么2027，那后天又要说提前了。表面上好像是为了解决问题，实际上就是想操纵局势啊，想让我们掉进他们挖好的坑里。这些年啊，美国这个台湾危机剧啊，那是演了一出又一出啊，就没消停过。这不，最近又开始下菜了，说咱们可能会提前动手，甚至说武力收复台湾的时间可能会提前到2025年下半年。哎呦喂，你说他们说谎都不打草稿的吗？其实这个原因很简单，就是他们自己家里面出了大问题，这个内忧外患已经是积重难返了。你想想看，川普这关税搞得这个国内经济不好，这失业的人是越来越多，这时候外部的危机不就成了转移视线最好的工具了吗？他们最近这个经济政策已经搞得老百姓是怨声载道了。再加上那一大堆的债务问题，那真是火烧眉毛了。说白了，这个美国和菲律宾这次搞这么大的军演，就是美国又想在南海搞事情，那想用这个军事力量吓唬咱们，阻止咱们发展。但是咱们中国可不是好欺负的，解放军已经用行动告诉他们了，谁要敢侵犯咱们的这个主权和南海的利益那咱们绝对是不可能客气的那肯定是狠狠的反击就连新加坡前外长杨荣文都说了，这个中国正在备战，美国不要轻易的去触碰中国的核心利益。
China is preparing for war. Preparing for war not because China wants war, but China knows that in order to avoid war, you must be prepared for war. So there's a famous line in Sun Tzu Bing Fa, The Art of War, which says, 无事其不攻，是无有所不可知攻也。In other words, do not plan on the assumption that the other side will not attack. Plan on the basis that you can withstand all attacks. Then there will be peace. Now, interestingly, this statement from Sun Tzu was quoted by Medvedev, the Russian Prime Minister, who has also been reading Sun Tzu. There are three main domains of warfare which I think China is worried about. Now, I don't belong to the Five Eyes. I'm not in government, so I'm just watching and trying to understand and make sense of what I read and see. One is, of course, nuclear warfare. China says it will not be the first to use nuclear weapons, so it must have a deterrent capability. The US has been quite determined to deny China a counter-strike capability. Because if it's just conventional warfare, repeated scenario war gaming by the Indo-Pacific Command, by RAND, shows that in a conventional war around Taiwan, the South China Sea, America cannot prevail. So they must be able to threaten nuclear weapons. But if China can threaten back, then that threat is blunted. And for China, time is important. The longer the contest is deferred, the better it is for them, because they're getting stronger. Whereas in America today is very divided. A lot of people say America has not been so divided since the Civil War. The Civil War was settled not by negotiation, not by one-table conversations. It was settled by violence. Terrible violence. So this period which America is going through now, where every institution has been weaponized and politicized, including the Supreme Court, is creating very deep divisions. To me, the greatest uncertainty in the world today is US politics. It's not US-China relations. For China, the big issue is Taiwan. China has been telling the Americans, you keep saying one Taiwan, you do something else. We don't believe you. We will judge by what you do. And Wang Yi said, if there's conflict over Taiwan, there will be ferocious storms. That's the word he used, ferocious storms. In other words, there'll be war. And the entire basis of US-China relations, which started with Kissinger and Nixon, was based on one China. Kissinger said, you can talk about everything else, but Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong will always come back to Taiwan. So Taiwan is not a card. Taiwan is the basis. Every American administration thinks it's a card, and then it is brought back to reality.
哎，这更为精彩的是啊，中国的高志凯教授霸气回怼外媒的视频啊，那直接让外媒集体破防哦。
China would not be massively expanding its nuclear weapons, which the United States is not doing. But China is. It seems to want to be able to destroy the world over 10 times, 50 times, 100 times. China would not be massively expanding its conventional strength, which won't really have any effect on the United States and our nuclear standoff. The purpose of that is to intimidate neighbors.
Everyone knows that the United States has the largest, if not one of the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world. And China's warheads added up together only account for a fraction of that of the United States. In terms of conventional weapons, China is a complete match against the United States. And China does not want to look at its neighboring country. We have 14 land neighboring countries. We have 6 maritime neighboring countries. No one is a match against China. China's military buildup is basically to prevent the United States using war as an instrument, try to surprise China and try to wrestle China down, or to delay China, to derail China's peaceful rise. That's the only purpose. China is making sure that the American gets the message. If you want to impose war on China, you get war. If you want to destroy China, you get destroyed. If you want to bomb China out with nuclear weapons, you will be wiped out with nuclear weapons. China is not going to be pushed around, and China will fight to the end. How many wars has China been involved in? 0. Let me emphasize, 0. This is the track record of China defending peace. And that is the track record of the United States being involved in war after war after war. Washington is the most disruptive force in the world. China stands for peace. The United States is eager to use war to solve its geopolitical problems in one region after another. No one can hide away from the hard truth and hard data. That is the world we are faced with. But if the United States dares to impose war, any kind of war, tariff war, trade war, technological war, Cold War, proxy war, hot war, China will fight back. That's not belligerence. That's the Chinese people's determination. to anyone trying to impose war on China.
这也太霸气了吧！这一刻，我们中国人呢真的是等太久了啊！这位高志凯先生啊，那可不是一般人哦，人家那是耶鲁大学的法学博士哦，全球化智库副主任哦，一大堆的头衔哦。他在面对外媒提问失去美国市场，中国怎么办时啊？哎，他的回答也是非常的精彩。
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care.
You can't...
We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
The loss of 15% of its export market, i.e. what you export to the US?
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
这场由高志凯引发的外交脱口秀啊，表面上看那是言辞犀利、硬核无比，实际上是更深层次的展现了中国的大国智慧。哎，咱们中国呢是一直坚持着这个不惹事啊，更不怕事的原则。就像专家说的，这个台湾的问题啊，它不是美国能随便玩弄的棋局啊。咱们中国呢会根据我们自己的这个节奏和战略，这推动两岸关系的和平发展。那咱的态度啊，一直也很明确，对吧？这些年啊，咱们看到这个美国一次啊又一次的想通过这个台湾问题啊来打压中国，哎，结果呢，反而让他们国内的矛盾啊更加激化。你做美国的敌人是危险的，但是做美国的朋友啊是致命的。我觉得萨克斯教授讲的真的是太好了。
Finally, let me just say with respect to China, China is not an enemy. China is just a success story. That's why it is viewed by the United States as an enemy, because China is a bigger economy than the United States. They speak nonsense every day. My country, my government. This is so familiar to me. Completely familiar. I begged the Ukrainians, and I had a track record with the Ukrainians. I advised the Ukrainians. I'm not anti-Ukrainian. I'm pro-Ukrainian completely. I said, save your lives, save your sovereignty, save your territory, be neutral. Don't listen to the Americans. I repeated to them the famous adage of Henry Kissinger, that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. Okay, so let me repeat that for Europe. To be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal.
那么大家又是怎么看的呢？这美国啊，在这个台湾问题上这些操作，真的能成功的挑起一场冲突吗？还是说啊，他们不过就是在用这个舆论制造假象，为这个美国的国内问题啊找替罪羊？好了，今天就给大家唠到这儿，欢迎订阅、点赞、分享哦！我是小兰，我们下期再见，感谢。